He stole from a billionaire, but instead of punishment, she was given a dangerous opportunity. Mira thought she was just another invisible face in the crowded streets of Accra, until one risky decision changed her fate forever. When she pickpockets a powerful businessman, she expects trouble. Instead, she's pulled into a world of wealth, betrayal, and secrets darker than she ever imagined. A billionaire with a hidden agenda. A street-smart girl with sharp instincts. A corporate empire on the edge of destruction. As Mira fights to uncover the truth, she realizes she's in way over her head. But it's too late to turn back now. The deeper she digs, the more dangerous it gets, and someone is willing to do anything to keep their secrets buried. Will she survive the game of power and deception? Watch till the end to find out. Love-gripping, suspense-filled stories. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an unforgettable tale. In the bustling city of Accra, where the streets hum with life and the scent of grilled meat lingers in the air, survival is a daily battle. This is the story of Mira, a homeless girl whose act of desperation led her into a world of power, deception, and redemption. What began as a simple act of theft soon turned into an opportunity that would change her life forever. Mira had not eaten all day. Hunger clawed at her stomach as she wandered through the lively streets of Accra. Vendors shouted, children laughed, and cars honked, but she was only focused on one thing: finding food. She had grown up on these streets, learning to move through crowds like a shadow. Each step she took was calculated, her sharp eyes scanning the people around her for an opportunity. The smell of grilled meat from a nearby vendor made her stomach ache, but she ignored it, knowing she had no money to buy anything. As she turned a corner, she spotted a well-dressed man stepping out of a black luxury car. He looked important, distracted by his phone call, completely unaware of his surroundings. It was the perfect chance. Mira moved quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stolen before, but this time, something felt different. Her fingers slipped into his pocket, her touch as light as a feather. Within seconds, she had the wallet in her hand. She could already picture herself buying warm food, maybe even saving some money for later. But just as she turned to disappear into the sea of people, a strong grip closed around her wrist. Panic surged through her veins as she struggled to free herself. Had she been caught? She expected a harsh slap or a furious yell, but none of that came. Instead, the grip remained firm yet controlled, holding her in place without hurting her. She slowly lifted her gaze to see the man she had stolen from, and to her surprise, he was smiling. The man observed her carefully, as though he could see straight into her soul. Mira braced herself for the worst, ready to run the moment his grip loosened. She had learned to never trust anyone, especially those who had wealth and power. They never showed kindness to people like her. But something about this man was different. He didn't look angry, nor did he seem interested in punishing her. The corners of his lips curled slightly, almost as if he was impressed. Mira had no idea what to make of it. Her instinct screamed at her to fight and flee, but her curiosity kept her frozen in place. Who was this man, and why wasn't he calling for the police? Mira had never encountered someone like him before. Most rich people walked past her like she was invisible. If they did acknowledge her, it was with disgust or pity, never anything in between. But this man wasn't looking at her with either of those expressions. Instead, there was something else. Something she couldn't quite place. Before she could figure it out, he made a proposition that left her stunned. It was not what she expected, not even close. And at that moment, Mira's entire life changed forever. Skeptical but desperate, Mira found herself sitting in the back of the luxurious car, clutching the stolen wallet. The leather seat felt strange beneath her. She had only ever sat on pavements or cardboard mats. The air inside the car smelled of something expensive and unfamiliar. The man beside her remained silent, his presence commanding yet calm. Mira wanted to believe this was a trick, that he would drive her straight to the police station. Her body was tense, her fingers gripping the wallet so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She knew she should run, but a small part of her was curious. Why would a rich man want to help a thief? The car moved smoothly through the busy streets, and for the first time in a long while, Mira felt the sensation of safety. It was a strange feeling, one she didn't trust. She had lived most of her life watching her back, afraid of what the next day might bring. The streets had taught her that nothing came for free. Everything had a price. And yet, here she was, being offered something she had never dared to dream of. The man beside her finally spoke, explaining his reason for stopping her. He wasn't just being kind, he had a purpose for her. Mira listened carefully, her mind racing with possibilities. Could this be real? Or was she walking into another trap? The man introduced himself as Adrian Mensah, a businessman known across the city. Mira had heard of him before, though only in passing. People spoke of his wealth, his power, and his ability to crush those who stood in his way. If that was true, why was he helping her? Adrian explained that his company was being stolen from, and he needed someone who could move unseen. Someone like her. At first, Mira didn't understand. She was just a girl from the streets. What did she know about catching thieves? But then, Adrian pointed out something she hadn't considered. She had survived by reading people, by spotting weaknesses, and by understanding when to strike. He needed someone with her instincts. Mira thought about his offer. She could return to the streets, back to hunger and loneliness, or she could take a risk and step into a world she had never known. It was a dangerous gamble. She didn't know if she could trust Adrian, but she did know one thing: she was tired of running. For the first time in her life, someone had seen value in her skills. If she accepted, she would have food, shelter, and maybe even a future. Taking a deep breath, Mira made her choice, knowing there was no turning back. The mansion was unlike anything Mira had ever seen before. It stood tall and grand, its high walls and towering gates, a symbol of wealth and power. She hesitated as she stepped out of the car, feeling small in its vast presence. The marble driveway gleamed under the evening lights, and large windows reflected the golden hues of the setting sun. The scent of flowers drifted from the perfectly manicured gardens, a sharp contrast to the filth and dust she was used to. Every part of this place screamed luxury, and Mira felt like an intruder in a world where she did not belong. Her heart pounded as she followed Adrian through the grand entrance, her eyes darting around in awe. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the polished floors shone so brightly she could see her reflection. The place was magnificent, but it also felt overwhelming. Oma, the housekeeper, greeted them at the entrance. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Dressed in a neatly pressed, traditional Ghanaian outfit, she gave Mira a long, assessing look. There was no warmth in her gaze, only silent judgment. Mira shrank under her stare, feeling exposed. She had faced worse before, people who sneered at her, who looked down at her like she was nothing. But there was something about Oma's gaze that made her feel like she was being measured, tested. Without a word, Oma turned and gestured for her to follow. Mira obeyed, her steps hesitant. She wasn't sure what she had walked into, but she knew one thing: nothing here would come easy. Mira was led through a series of hallways, each more luxurious than the last. The paintings on the walls, the intricate carvings on the furniture, the silk curtains that swayed gently with the breeze, all of it was so different from the crumbling buildings she had grown up around. They reached a modest yet elegant guest room, where a warm meal had been placed on the table. Mira's stomach clenched at the sight of food. Without waiting for permission, she rushed to the table and ate greedily, stuffing spoonfuls of steaming jollof rice into her mouth. Oma watched silently, her face unreadable. When Mira finally slowed down, Oma spoke. "Nothing in this house comes for free." The words sent a chill down Mira's spine. Mira woke up the next morning in a soft bed, something she had never experienced before. The sheet smelled fresh, and the mattress cradled her body in a way that made her reluctant to get up. But reality soon reminded her why she was here. She had a job to do. She quickly dressed and followed Oma, who led her to a sleek black car waiting outside. The drive to Adrian's company was smooth, and as they approached, Mira's eyes widened. The towering glass building stood tall against the sky, a symbol of power and wealth. People in elegant suits walked in and out with purpose, looking important and busy. Mira had spent her life watching such places from the outside. Now, she was about to step into one. Stepping into the building, Mira felt out of place. The air smelled of expensive cologne, polished wood, and freshly brewed coffee. The marble floors reflected the glow of modern lighting, and the large windows allowed sunlight to pour in. Everyone seemed to belong, except her. She tugged at the hem of her clean but simple clothes, wondering if they could see right through her. Adrian walked ahead confidently, and she had to quicken her steps to keep up. Employees glanced at her with curiosity, some with disapproval. She had to remind herself that she wasn't here to impress them. She had a mission, and she needed to stay focused. Mira stepped through the massive glass doors of Adrian's company, her breath catching as she took in the sights before her. The lobby was grand, filled with polished floors that gleamed under the bright lights. Large paintings hung on the walls, and a receptionist sat behind an elegant desk, answering calls in a professional tone. The air smelled of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. People in sharp suits and high heels moved with purpose, each engaged in their own important tasks. Mira felt small in this world, out of place in her simple clothes, but she reminded herself why she was here. She was not just another outsider, she had a job to do. She forced her feet forward, keeping close to Adrian as they walked past curious stares. As they entered the private office, Adrian introduced Mira to Kofi, one of his senior employees. Kofi was a tall man with sharp eyes that seemed to scan every detail about her. He raised an eyebrow at her presence, clearly unimpressed. Mira could tell that he, like many others, doubted her abilities. "She will be assisting me," Adrian stated firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mira nodded, trying to appear confident even though her heart was racing. She had never worked in an office before, let alone one as sophisticated as this. But she had sharp instincts, and she was ready to learn. Kofi's smirk didn't fade, as if he found the whole situation amusing. "Let's see if you can keep up," he muttered before walking away. Mira felt a challenge in his words, and she knew she had to prove herself. Mira spent the day observing everything around her. She paid attention to the way people spoke, the way they interacted, and, more importantly, the way they reacted when Adrian wasn't looking. She noticed little details. Some employees avoided eye contact, while others seemed too eager to please. There was tension in the air, an unspoken worry that lingered beneath the surface. The company was big, and she didn't yet understand its structure, but she knew one thing for certain: someone here was stealing from Adrian. And whoever it was, they were good at covering their tracks. Mira would have to be smarter, quicker, and more observant than ever before. This wasn't like surviving on the streets. This was a new kind of game, and she had just stepped onto the playing field. By the end of the day, Mira felt exhausted. Her mind raced with all the new information she had gathered. As she left the office with Adrian, she knew she was at the beginning of something far bigger than she had imagined. She wasn't just an outsider looking in anymore, she was a part of this now. The weight of the mission pressed on her shoulders, but she was determined to see it through. As the car drove her back to the mansion, she stared out at the city lights, knowing that her life would never be the same again. The streets had taught her survival, but here, she would have to learn something new, strategy. And if she played this right, she would uncover the truth before anyone realized what she was up to. The next morning, Mira woke up feeling a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. She had spent her first full day in Adrian's office, watching and learning. Today, she had to prove she was capable of more. She dressed in the simple but clean clothes provided for her and made her way downstairs, where Adrian was already waiting in the dining room. The table was filled with freshly baked bread, tropical fruits, and hot tea, but Mira barely touched her meal. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying everything she had observed the previous day. Adrian noticed her quiet demeanor and leaned forward slightly, as if measuring her thoughts. Then, without any warning, he gave her a new challenge. He wanted her to get closer to the employees, to listen, to learn, and most importantly, to watch for signs of deceit. Mira's heart pounded at the weight of the task. She had always been good at reading people, but this was different. The streets had their own rules, but here, in a corporate environment, deception was more refined, more calculated. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. After breakfast, Adrian handed her a small notebook and told her to use it to record anything suspicious. The drive to the office was quiet, Mira deep in thought as she planned her approach. She needed to blend in, to become part of the environment, so no one would suspect that she was watching. As they arrived, she noticed Kofi eyeing her from across the lobby. His expression held the same amusement as before, but this time, there was something else, curiosity. He didn't know what she was up to, and that gave her an advantage. Mira spent the morning moving through different departments, asking small but strategic questions. She made casual conversations with employees, learning who they were, what they did, and how they felt about their work. Some were friendly, others indifferent, but a few seemed guarded, as if afraid of being watched. She paid attention to how they reacted when Adrian's name was mentioned. Some spoke of him with admiration, while others hesitated before answering. There was something there, hidden beneath the surface, and Mira knew she had to dig deeper. During lunch, she found herself sitting with a group of employees in the break room. She listened as they spoke about office rumors, about missing funds and whispers of a possible traitor. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. By the end of the day, Mira had gathered enough observations to know one thing for certain: someone was definitely stealing from Adrian. But finding out who wouldn't be easy. The thief was careful, hiding in plain sight, and whoever it was had been doing this for a long time. As she stepped into the car at the end of the day, Adrian turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What did you learn?" he finally asked. Mira hesitated before answering. She had learned a lot, but the truth was still buried under layers of lies. She needed more time. She looked at Adrian and said simply, "I need to get closer." Adrian nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. He had chosen well. Mira wasn't just a thief, she was a hunter. And now, the hunt had truly begun. Mira returned to the office the next morning, her mind sharp and ready. She had spent the previous night going over everything she had learned. There were too many unanswered questions, too many people acting suspiciously. She needed to find something solid, something undeniable. As she walked through the hallways, she paid close attention to conversations happening around her. People whispered in hushed tones, exchanging nervous glances. Whatever was going on, they all seemed to know something, except her. Mira was determined to change that. She needed to see what was happening behind closed doors. She knew the only way to get real answers was to take a risk. That afternoon, she decided to sneak into the records room. It was a restricted area, but she had been watching closely and knew when the guards took their breaks. Timing her steps carefully, she slipped into the dimly lit room. Rows of filing cabinets stretched before her, filled with documents that could hold the truth. Mira's fingers trembled slightly as she rifled through the files, searching for anything unusual. It wasn't long before she found a folder labeled with suspicious financial records. Her eyes scanned the pages, and there it was, evidence of missing money, transactions that didn't add up. Someone had been siphoning funds from Adrian's company for months, maybe even years. Just as Mira was about to take a picture of the documents, she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart pounded as she quickly slid the folder back into place and hid behind a cabinet. A moment later, the door creaked open, and she saw Kofi step inside. He moved with purpose, heading straight for the very drawer she had just been looking through. Mira held her breath, watching as he flipped through files before pulling one out and stuffing it into his pocket. It was clear now, Kofi was involved. But was he working alone? She couldn't risk confronting him yet. She needed more proof. She waited until he left before sneaking out, her mind racing. That night, as she lay in bed, Mira went over everything she had seen. She had proof that money was being stolen, and she had seen Kofi take something from the records room. But she still didn't know who the real mastermind was. Was Kofi acting on his own, or was there someone higher up pulling the strings? She needed to get closer to him, to make him trust her. If she could earn his confidence, he might slip up and reveal the truth. This was a dangerous game she was playing, but Mira was no stranger to danger. She had spent her whole life surviving, and she wasn't about to stop now. The hunt had just begun. The next morning, Mira arrived at the office with a plan in mind. She needed to get closer to Kofi, to observe his movements and find out what exactly he was hiding. She had seen him take a file, but what was in it? More importantly, who else was involved? Mira decided to keep her distance at first, watching him from afar, noting his interactions. Kofi seemed more on edge than usual, his eyes darting around the office as if expecting someone to be watching. Every time he passed Mira, his expression hardened, as if he could sense that she was onto something. She had to be careful, one wrong move and he would know she was watching him. During her lunch break, Mira noticed something unusual. Kofi was speaking with another employee, a man she recognized from the accounting department. Their conversation was hushed, their movements cautious. Mira discreetly moved closer, pretending to look at her phone while listening. The words were fragmented, but she caught enough to know that they were discussing something dangerous. Too much attention. Adrian suspects, the words sent a chill through Mira. If Adrian was starting to suspect, it meant that Kofi and whoever was working with him were running out of time. That also meant they would become more desperate, more reckless. Mira had to act fast before they covered their tracks. That evening, as Mira was leaving the office, Kofi approached her unexpectedly. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with something colder, more threatening. He leaned in slightly, his voice low and sharp. "Be careful where you poke your nose, little girl." Mira's stomach twisted, but she refused to show fear. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down. This was the confirmation she needed. Kofi knew that she was onto him. He was warning her, but Mira also knew something else. If he was resorting to threats, it meant he was scared. And scared people made mistakes. That night, as she lay in bed, Mira replayed the encounter in her mind. Kofi was hiding something big, something that went beyond simple theft. He wasn't just stealing money, he was part of something much larger. The fact that he had confronted her meant that time was running out for both of them. She had two choices: back down and stay safe, or push forward and uncover the full truth. Mira knew there was only one real option. She wasn't going to back down. Whatever Kofi was hiding, she was going to find out. The warning he had given her only strengthened her resolve. She had spent her whole life running, but now, for the first time, she was running towards something. And she wasn't going to stop until she had the truth. The morning after Kofi's warning, Mira arrived at the office with a renewed sense of determination. She had chosen her path, she wasn't going to back down. But she also knew she had to be smart. Kofi was watching her now, and any wrong move could put her in serious danger. She decided to act as if nothing had changed, keeping her interaction normal, her movements casual. If Kofi thought she had backed off, he might let his guard down. But Mira wasn't alone in this game. As she sat at her desk, flipping through papers, she felt someone watching her. She turned to see a young woman from the accounting department staring at her. The woman hesitated for a moment before walking over. "I know what you're looking for," she whispered. Mira's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the help she needed? The woman introduced herself as Ya, a junior accountant who had been working at the company for 2 years. She spoke in hushed tones, her eyes darting around nervously. She explained that she had also noticed discrepancies in the company's financial records and had started keeping track of them. But when she got too close to the truth, she received an anonymous email warning her to stop asking questions. She had been afraid to speak up, but seeing Mira investigating gave her courage. "I don't know who is behind it all," he admitted, "but I know where you should start looking." She handed Mira a small slip of paper with a series of numbers written on it, bank account transfers, untraceable amounts being funneled somewhere. It was the proof Mira needed to go deeper. That evening, after everyone had left the office, Mira and Ya stayed behind. They sat at a desk, going over the documents Ya had gathered. Mira felt a strange sense of relief. After days of working alone, she finally had an ally together. They pieced together a trail of missing funds, hidden transactions, and shell companies. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. This was not just a case of simple theft. Someone was systematically draining money, covering their tracks with precision. And whoever it was, they had been doing it for years. Mira's mind raced with possibilities. Could it really just be Kofi? Or was he just a pawn in a much larger scheme? Just as Mira was about to suggest their next move, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone else was still in the building. Mira's pulse quickened as she motioned for Ya to stay quiet. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped right outside the door. The handle turned slightly. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Had they been discovered? After a tense moment, the footsteps retreated. The person, whoever it was, had walked away. Mira let out a shaky breath. They had been lucky this time, but it was clear now, someone was onto them. And if they weren't careful, they would be the next ones to receive a warning. Or worse. Mira barely slept at night. Her mind was racing, replaying the moment the footsteps had stopped outside the door. It could have been a coincidence, but deep down, she knew better. Someone had been watching them. Someone knew they were getting too close. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, but it also hardened her resolve. She had started this journey with nothing to lose, but now she had come too far to turn back. If she stopped now, all the risks she had taken would be for nothing. She needed to act fast before whoever was behind this could erase their tracks. The next morning, Mira and Ya met in secret at a small cafe away from the office. They couldn't risk speaking in the building anymore. Over cups of steaming tea, Ya slid a folder across the table. Inside were more financial records, this time with direct links to offshore accounts. Mira's breath caught as she recognized a name buried within the transactions: Michael, Adrian's trusted assistant. It was a shocking discovery. Michael had worked for Adrian for years. He was the last person anyone would suspect. But the numbers didn't lie. He had been moving money under different aliases, hiding behind complex financial loopholes. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit. Mira and Ya knew they needed more than just bank records. They needed undeniable proof, something that Adrian wouldn't be able to ignore. That night, they decided to take their biggest risk yet. They would break into Michael's office and search for physical evidence. They waited until the building was nearly empty, then slipped inside, their hearts pounding. The office was locked, but Yah had stolen a spare key earlier that day. With shaking hands, Mira turned the lock and pushed the door open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the city lights filtering through the window. They moved quickly, searching through drawers, cabinets, anything that could give them what they needed. Just as Mira pulled out a folder filled with suspicious documents, they heard a noise, a faint click, the sound of a door shutting somewhere in the distance. Panic surged through her. Someone was in the building. She and Yah exchanged fearful glances, their breath shallow. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before they were caught. Mira stuffed the papers into her bag and motioned for Yah to move. As they slipped out of the office, footsteps echoed down the hallway. They barely made it into the stairwell before the office door swung open behind them. Mira didn't dare look back. She gripped Yah's hand and whispered, "Run." And they did, disappearing into the night, carrying with them the truth that could bring everything crashing down. Mira and Yah ran through the quiet streets, their breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The night air was thick with humidity, clinging to their skin as they darted through alleyways and side streets, desperately putting distance between themselves and the office. Mira's heart pounded so loudly she was sure it would give them away. She clutched the bag tightly, the stolen documents feeling heavier than they actually were. Yah's grip on her wrist was tight, almost painful, but Mira didn't let go. They didn't stop running until they were deep within a quiet neighborhood, far from prying eyes. Only then did they allow themselves a moment to catch their breath. They ducked into a dimly lit corner near an old storefront, panting heavily. Mira risked a glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see a shadowed figure following them, but the streets were empty. "That was too close," Yah finally managed to say between gasps. Mira nodded, wiping the sweat from her forehead. They both knew that whoever had been in the building had likely discovered that something was missing. If Michael or Kofi were involved, they wouldn't let this go unnoticed. Their actions tonight had painted a target on their backs. There was no turning back now. They had to see this through to the end. Once they had calmed down, they carefully opened the bag and pulled out the documents. The papers detailed large amounts of money being funneled through fake contracts and shell companies. Mira traced the lines with her fingers, her eyes scanning for the most important detail: who was truly behind it all. She gasped as she recognized the signature on one of the documents. It wasn't just Michael's name on the transfers. There was another signature, one that belonged to someone even closer to Adrian. The realization made her stomach drop. This went deeper than she had imagined. The betrayal wasn't just coming from the shadows, it was coming from within Adrian's trusted circle. Mira and Yah knew they had to act fast. Adrian needed to see these papers before Michael or anyone else had a chance to cover their tracks. But how could they get to him without being stopped? They were in danger now, and their enemies wouldn't hesitate to silence them. The safest place was no longer safe. They couldn't go back to their homes. They couldn't go back to the office. They had to find a way to get to Adrian without being followed. Mira's mind raced through possible plans, but each one was riskier than the last. They were running out of time, and if they didn't move soon, they would lose their only chance to expose the truth. Yah reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "We can't go to him directly," she whispered. "But we can send this to him anonymously." Mira hesitated. Would Adrian believe them without seeing the evidence in person? Would he recognize the danger they were in? There was no way to know. But one thing was certain, they couldn't afford to wait any longer. With a deep breath, Mira nodded. They had started this together, and they would finish it together. The truth was out there now, and there was no stopping what was coming next. Mira and Ya wasted no time after deciding to send the documents to Adrian. They moved to a secluded location, an old internet cafe that Ya knew would allow them to send the files without being traced. The dimly lit room smelled of dust and old electronics, but it was safe. Mira pulled out her phone and took photos of the documents, making sure every detail was captured. Ya typed out a message carefully, explaining that they had uncovered undeniable proof of financial fraud within the company and that Adrian needed to act immediately. They debated whether to reveal their identities but ultimately decided against it. If Adrian didn't believe the message, he wouldn't believe them in person either. The files spoke for themselves. With a final deep breath, Ya pressed send. The message was gone. Now, all they could do was wait. They left the cafe and found a small roadside food stand where they could blend in while watching for any signs of danger. Mira's nerves were on edge. Every passing car, every stranger walking by felt like a potential threat. She had spent years surviving on the streets, but this was different. This wasn't just about her anymore, this was about exposing powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to protect themselves. Ya tried to stay calm, sipping on a bottle of water, but Mira could see the tension in her shoulders. They both knew that once Adrian read that message, everything would change. Would he believe them? Would he confront Michael? Or would he ignore it, unwilling to accept that someone close to him had betrayed him? Hours passed with no response. The silence was deafening. Mira checked her phone repeatedly, hoping for some sign that Adrian had seen the message. Then, finally, a notification appeared. It wasn't from Adrian, but from an unknown number. The message was brief, chilling in its simplicity. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Stop now before it's too late. Mira's blood ran cold. Ya read the message over her shoulder, her face going pale. There was no doubt about it, they had been found out. Someone knew they had the documents, and now they were being warned to back off. But backing off was not an option. If anything, this only confirmed that they were onto something big. Mira took a deep breath and looked at Ya. We keep going, she said firmly. Ya nodded, fear in her eyes but also determination. They couldn't turn back now. They had to find Adrian and make sure he saw the truth with his own eyes. But getting to him wouldn't be easy. If someone had already found them, it meant they were being watched. It also meant that their time was running out. They needed to act before whoever was behind this decided that a warning wasn't enough. Mira and Ya knew they couldn't waste any more time. With the warning message fresh in their minds, they decided to take a more direct approach. They needed to find Adrian in person. The longer they waited, the higher the chances that their enemies would cover their tracks or worse, find a way to silence them. Mira suggested they go straight to Adrian's mansion, knowing that confronting him at work would be too risky. Ya hesitated but eventually agreed. They hailed a taxi, constantly checking to see if they were being followed. The city lights blurred past as they sped toward their destination, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. As they arrived at Adrian's estate, the atmosphere felt tense. The guards at the gate eyed them suspiciously, clearly under strict orders not to let anyone in. Mira took a deep breath and stepped forward. Tell Adrian it's urgent, she insisted, her voice unwavering. The guard hesitated, but something in Mira's expression convinced him to make the call. After a few tense moments, the gate slowly opened. Mira and Ya exchanged glances before stepping inside. They had made it this far, now came the hardest part. Inside the mansion, Adrian was waiting for them in his study, his expression unreadable. He gestured for them to sit, but Mira remained standing. She pulled out the stolen documents and placed them on his desk. You need to see this, she said firmly. Adrian's eyes flickered with curiosity before he picked up the papers. Silence filled the room as he read through the evidence. His jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the edges of the documents. Then, without a word, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Michael," he said, his tone deceptively calm. "Come to my study immediately." Mira's heart raced. This was it, the moment of truth. Minutes later, Michael walked in, his usual confident demeanor intact. But when he saw the papers on Adrian's desk, his face paled. "What's this?" he asked, his voice steady, but his hands clenched slightly at his sides. Adrian stood slowly, his eyes locked onto Michael's. "You tell me," he replied coldly. The air in the room was thick with tension. Mira and Ya watched as the confrontation unfolded, knowing that the truth was finally out in the open. But would Adrian be willing to accept the depth of the betrayal? Or was there still more yet to be uncovered? The air in Adrian's study grew heavier as Michael stood frozen, staring at the incriminating documents spread out before him. His normally composed face was now pale, his confident posture slightly faltering. Mira, Ya, and Adrian all watched him, waiting for his response. But instead of denial, Michael did something unexpected. He let out a slow breath, straightened his suit, and smirked. "So, you finally figured it out," he said, his voice eerily calm. Mira's stomach twisted. His lack of panic confirmed what she already suspected: Michael was no ordinary thief. He had been doing this for a long time, and he wasn't afraid of being caught. Adrian, however, wasn't amused. He slammed his fist on the desk, his patience snapping. "How long, Michael?" His voice was dangerously low, filled with restrained fury. "How long have you been betraying me?" Michael chuckled softly before leaning against the desk. "You think this is just about money," he said, shaking his head. "You're blind, Adrian. You always have been. This company, your empire, it was never just yours. You stepped on people to get to the top, and you left others in the shadows. Did you really think no one would come for you?" Mira and Ya exchanged uneasy glances. This was more than just an employee stealing money, this was personal. Someone had been orchestrating this from behind the scenes, and Michael was just one piece of the puzzle. Adrian took a deep breath, regaining control of his emotions. "Who are you working for?" he demanded. Michael remained silent, his smirk fading slightly. The room was tense, the seconds stretching painfully long. Finally, Michael's lips parted, but before he could speak, the sudden sound of shattering glass filled the room. A gunshot rang out, and the study plunged into chaos. Mira ducked instinctively as Adrian pushed her behind him. Michael collapsed to the floor, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. The window behind him was shattered, the night air rushing into the room. Someone had tried to silence him. Adrian pulled out his phone and backed orders to his security team, but Mira was already thinking ahead. Whoever was behind this wasn't just after money, they were willing to kill to keep their secrets hidden. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Chaos filled the study as Adrian's security team rushed in, weapons drawn. Mira, Ya, and Adrian remained crouched behind the desk, their hearts pounding in unison. Michael groaned in pain, his blood pooling onto the expensive rug beneath him. Adrian's face was dark with fury as he shouted orders to his guards to secure the perimeter. But Mira wasn't focused on the aftermath, she was thinking ahead. The shooter hadn't missed by accident. The bullet had struck Michael's shoulder, not his head or heart. Whoever had fired that shot hadn't been trying to kill him, they had been sending a message. Michael let out a pained chuckle as he pressed a hand against his wound. "You still don't get it, do you?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. Adrian's jaw clenched. "Who are they?" he demanded. Michael smacked through the pain, his eyes glinting with something close to amusement. "You're looking in the wrong direction," he rasped. "It's bigger than me, bigger than you." He coughed, his body trembling from blood loss. Mira watched him carefully, her mind racing. He wasn't scared, even now. That meant he truly believed that whoever was behind this was untouchable. Just then, one of the guards rushed back in. "Sir, we found the shooter's position, but they are gone," he reported breathlessly. Adrian's fist clenched. "Find them," he barked. The guard nodded and hurried away, but deep down, Mira already knew that whoever had fired that shot wouldn't be caught so easily. They were professionals, working for someone powerful enough to manipulate everything from behind the scenes. Her gaze flickered back to Michael, who was growing weaker. If they didn't get answers soon, they might lose the only lead they had. Ya, who had been silent until now, suddenly stepped forward. "If we get him to a hospital, he might talk," she said quickly. Adrian hesitated before nodding. "Take him to my private doctor," he ordered his men. Two of the guards lifted Michael, carrying him out of the study. Adrian turned to Mira and Ya, his expression unreadable. "You two are in this now," he said simply. Mira straightened her posture. "We were in this the moment we found out the truth," she replied. Adrian gave a small nod of respect before exhaling deeply. "Then we bring this to an end," he said firmly. But deep down, Mira knew that the enemy they were about to face was more powerful than any of them had imagined. Michael was rushed to Adrian's private doctor under heavy security. The bullet had missed any vital organs, but he was weak from blood loss. Mira, Ya, and Adrian followed closely behind, knowing they couldn't afford to let him slip away before getting the answers they needed. Adrian paced outside the doctor's office, his fist clenched. He had built his empire with loyalty and trust, and now those very foundations were crumbling beneath him. Mira watched him carefully. She understood his frustration, but they had to stay focused. Whoever was behind this was still out there, pulling the strings. After an hour, the doctor emerged from the room. "He'll survive," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "But he needs rest. No stress, no questioning, at least for tonight." Adrian sighed, rubbing his temples, but nodded. They had no choice but to wait. But waiting wasn't an option for Mira. She pulled Ya aside and whispered, "We need to dig deeper while we still have time." Ya hesitated but then nodded in agreement. They had come too far to slow down now. That night, Mira and Ya snuck into Adrian's home office while he was distracted making security arrangements. They combed through files, searching for anything that could connect Michael to the mastermind behind this conspiracy. Mira's hands trembled as she found an encrypted email exchange between Michael and an unknown sender. The messages were vague but hinted at a major transfer of funds, one that was set to take place soon. Mira's heart pounded. They were running out of time. Whoever was behind this was still moving, still covering their tracks. Just as Mira was about to show Ya the emails, they heard a noise outside the office. Footsteps. Someone was approaching. Mira quickly shut the laptop and motioned for Ya to hide. The door handle twisted, and the door creaked open. Mira held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. A shadowy figure stepped inside, their movements cautious. The web of lies was tightening around them, and they were now trapped in the center of it. Mira's heart pounded as the shadowy figure stepped into the office, the dim light casting long, eerie shapes across the walls. She pressed herself deeper into the darkness, her breath shallow. Ya, hidden behind a large cabinet, stayed perfectly still. The figure moved cautiously, their steps careful, deliberate. Mira could barely make out their features, but she could tell they were searching for something. Or someone. Her fingers clenched around the edge of the desk, every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden. But then the figure did something unexpected. They walked straight to the desk, opened a drawer, and retrieved the folder. The same folder Mira had seen earlier. The person knew exactly what they were looking for. They weren't just sneaking in, they were retrieving evidence before anyone else could find it. Whoever this was, they were part of the conspiracy. Just as the figure turned to leave, a faint creak echoed through the room, shifting ever so slightly. The figure froze. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Time seemed to slow as the intruder's head tilted slightly, as if sensing their presence. Then, in an instant, they bolted for the door. Without thinking, Mira lunged from her hiding spot, grabbing the person's arm. They struggled, but Mira was strong, fueled by adrenaline. The scuffle sent papers flying as the room filled with the sounds of shuffling feet and heavy breathing. The door suddenly burst open, and Adrian's guards stormed in, their weapons drawn. The figure yanked free from Mira's grasp and tried to run, but one of the guards tackled them to the ground. The dim light finally illuminated their face, and Mira gasped. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone they all knew. The conspiracy had just taken a darker turn, because the traitor standing before them had been hiding in plain sight all along. The moment stretched unbearably as the guards pinned the intruder to the floor. The dim light cast eerie shadows across the office, and Mira's pulse pounded in her ears. She stepped forward, hesitant yet desperate to see the face of the person who had been working against them. When the guard yanked the hood away, a collective gasp filled the room. It was Kofi. Mira's mind reeled. Kofi had always been smug, dismissive, but she had never imagined he was deeply entangled in the conspiracy. His lips curled into a smirk despite the situation. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice steady despite the guards holding him down. Adrian stepped forward, his expression dark. "No, Kofi. You made the mistake," he replied coldly. Ya clutched Mira's arm, her fingers trembling. "I knew something was off about him," she whispered. Mira nodded, but her thoughts were racing. If Kofi was the one sneaking into Adrian's office, retrieving documents, covering tracks, who was he doing it for? Kofi was important, but he wasn't the mastermind. There was someone higher up pulling the strings. Adrian signaled the guards to take Kofi away for questioning, but before they could drag him from the room, he spoke again, his tone laced with amusement. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea what you're up against." His words sent a shiver through Mira. She exchanged a glance with Adrian. The battle wasn't over. If anything, it was only just beginning. Mira's mind swirled with possibilities as Kofi was dragged away by the guards. His smirk lingered in her thoughts, his words echoing in her mind. "You think this ends with me?" That one sentence carried an ominous weight, a silent warning that something bigger was coming. Adrian stood rigid, his eyes burning with anger, but Mira knew rage alone wouldn't get them any closer to the truth. They had uncovered one layer of deception, but there were still many more hidden beneath. Determined to keep digging, Mira and Ya spent the next few hours going through the files Kofi had tried to take. The encrypted emails, the offshore accounts, everything pointed to someone far more powerful than Kofi. Ya furrowed her brows as she scanned through another document. "These transactions, they're tied to someone within Adrian's inner circle," she whispered. Mira felt a chill creep up her spine. If the true mastermind was close to Adrian, that meant they were all still in danger. Adrian's phone buzzed suddenly, shattering the silence. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. "It's from an unknown number," he muttered. He placed the call on speaker, and a distorted voice filled the room. "You should have left it alone, Adrian," the voice said, calm but threatening. "Now, you've made yourself a target." Mira clenched her fist. This was it, the true villain was finally making themselves known. But they weren't scared. They were warning Adrian because they still believed they had the upper hand. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" he demanded. The voice chuckled, sending a wave of unease through the room. "You already know," the voice replied before the call cut off. Silence fell between them. Ya looked at Mira, her eyes wide with realization. They did know. The pieces fit together now. And when Adrian slowly exhaled, Mira saw it in his eyes, recognition. The mastermind behind it all was someone Adrian had trusted. Someone close enough to destroy him from within. And now, the real fight was about to begin. The weight of realization settled heavily in the room. Adrian clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists as he paced the office. Mira and Ya exchanged a glance. If Adrian knew who was behind everything, they needed to act before the enemy struck again. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond the mansion's walls. Finally, Adrian exhaled sharply and turned to them. There's only one person who had access to this level of financial power, someone close enough to manipulate everything without raising suspicion. His voice was steady, but beneath it, Mira could sense the barely contained anger. "It's Okoro." Mira's stomach twisted. She had heard that name before, Adrian's longtime business partner, a man known for his charm and influence in the corporate world. Okoro had always appeared loyal, but now the truth was unraveling. The pieces fit. The missing funds, the offshore accounts, the attempt on Michael's life, it all pointed to Okoro. He had used Kofi and Michael as pawns, but now, with his cover blown, he wouldn't hesitate to protect himself by any means necessary. "We have to act fast," Ya said, her voice urgent. "He knows we're getting close. He'll try to disappear, or worse, silence us before we can expose him." Adrian nodded grimly. "Then we bring him down before he has the chance." His voice was resolute, but Mira knew this wouldn't be easy. Okoro was powerful, well-connected, and dangerous. They were no longer just exposing a fraud, they were walking straight into the path of a man who had everything to lose. The fight wasn't just for justice anymore, it was for survival. The revelation of Okoro's betrayal left a thick tension in the air. Adrian clenched his fist, his mind racing through every deal, every handshake, every moment he had trusted the man who had now turned against him. Mira could see the storm brewing in his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. But they couldn't afford reckless actions. If Okoro had been orchestrating this for so long, he was prepared for a confrontation. They had to be smarter, faster. Ya pulled out the remaining documents they had uncovered. "If we want to take Okoro down, we need undeniable proof," she said. "The financial records are strong, but we need something bigger. Something that will make it impossible for him to escape." Mira nodded. "We need a confession." Adrian exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Okoro won't just admit to this. He'll deny everything and use his influence to silence us before we can act." Mira's mind raced, piecing together an idea. "Then we make him believe he's won," she said. Adrian and Ya looked at her curiously. "We set a trap. We make him feel safe enough to slip up." They formulated a plan, each detail carefully designed to draw Okoro out into the open. Adrian would reach out to him under the guise of making peace, pretending to accept whatever excuse Okoro came up with. Meanwhile, Mira and Ya would work in the background, planting recording devices and ensuring they captured every word. If Okoro admitted to anything, they would have the evidence needed to bring him down once and for all. As they finalized their plan, Mira felt the weight of the situation settle over her. This was dangerous. Okoro wasn't just a fraud, he was a man who had already shown he was willing to kill to protect his empire. If this failed, they wouldn't get another chance. But looking at Adrian, Ya, and the path that had led her here, Mira knew one thing for sure, she was ready. She had spent her life surviving in the shadows, but now, it was time to step into the light and fight for something bigger than herself. The plan was in motion. Adrian, with his years of experience in high-stakes business negotiations, knew how to play the part. He reached out to Okoro, requesting a private meeting under the guise of smoothing over their supposed misunderstanding. Okoro, ever the cunning strategist, agreed without hesitation. He believed he had the upper hand, confident that Adrian was walking straight into his grasp. But what he didn't know was that every move he made was being watched. Mira and Ya worked tirelessly to set up the trap. Small, discreet recording devices were placed in Adrian's study where the meeting would take place. They ensured there were backup cameras hidden in the corners of the room, capturing every angle. If Okoro so much as hinted at his involvement in the embezzlement and attempted assassinations, they would have irrefutable proof. The night before the meeting, Mira lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was restless. This was the biggest risk they had taken so far, and failure was not an option. If Okoro caught on to their plan, he wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. But this wasn't just about exposing a crime anymore. It was about justice, for Adrian, for the people who had lost their livelihoods because of Okoro's greed, and for herself. She had come from nothing, yet she was now standing against one of the most powerful men in the city. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The following evening, the stage was set. Okoro arrived at Adrian's mansion, dressed impeccably as always, his demeanor composed. He greeted Adrian with a knowing smirk, settling into the leather chair across from him. "I knew you'd come around," he said smoothly. Adrian, playing his part flawlessly, poured them both a drink. "I needed time to see things clearly," he responded. The conversation began with pleasantries, but Mira, hidden in the next room, could feel the tension growing. They just needed Okoro to sleep to admit one crucial detail. And as the minutes passed, the moment they had been waiting for inched closer. Okoro took a slow sip of his drink, his confidence unwavering. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his expression controlled, but Mira could see the fire in his eyes. The conversation flowed as expected, Okoro attempting to shift blame, downplaying the accusations. But he was also arrogant, too arrogant to resist boasting about his cleverness. "I only did what anyone else in my position would do," Okoro finally admitted, swirling his glass. "You built an empire, Adrian, but you left cracks in the foundation. I simply took advantage of the opportunities you were too blind to see." Mira's heart pounded. That was it. The confession. Hidden cameras and microphones captured every word. Adrian clenched his jaw but maintained his composure. "And the attempt on my life. Was that also just business?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Okoro smirked but said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Before Okoro could react, the doors to the study burst open, and a team of police officers stormed in. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "What is this?" he demanded, but the truth was already out. Officers surrounded him, their guns drawn, as one stepped forward to read him his charges. Fraud. Embezzlement. Attempted murder. The weight of his crimes finally caught up with him, and for the first time, the smug expression vanished from his face. As they hauled Okoro away, Adrian let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. The battle was over. Justice had prevailed. Mira and Ya stood together, watching as the man who had caused so much destruction was taken away in handcuffs. Mira felt an overwhelming sense of relief, but also something deeper, pride. She had helped uncover the truth, helped take down a man who had thought himself untouchable. She had come a long way from the hungry girl on the streets, and for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. Days later, Adrian personally thanked Mira and Ya for their bravery. "You could have walked away," he told Mira. "But you stayed." You fought for what was right. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a job offer, one with a future. A real future. Mira looked at the paper in her hands, then up at Adrian. I've spent my whole life running, she said. Maybe it's time I stayed. With a grateful heart and a new beginning ahead of her, Mira knew one thing for sure: she had stolen more than a wallet that fateful day. She had stolen a chance at a better life. And she wasn't going to waste it. Mira also realized that everyone deserves a second chance, and true value lies in a person's character, not their circumstances. Mira's journey from a desperate thief to a trusted ally in a corporate world showed that resilience, intelligence, and integrity can open doors to new opportunities. Her story also highlights the importance of trust, redemption, and standing up for what is right, even when faced with powerful opposition.